for you.
Okay. I'm alarmed now.
All right, let's try that one more time. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, for my next segment, what I'd like to do is introduce you to a gentleman by the name of Jacob Sullum. Jacob is a senior editor with Reason Magazine, and Jacob is going to talk to us a little bit about Reason and a little bit about his view on liberty, electronic cigarettes, and prohibition. So first, Jacob, before we get started, thank you, first of all, for coming on my program. And second of all, a lot of my audience, I don't think is going to be as familiar with Reason Magazine as I am. So I'd like you, if you could, at first, just start and give us an introduction to Reason.
Okay, well, Reason is a political magazine that covers public policy and politics and culture from a libertarian perspective. And what that means is that we favor the least amount of government and the most amount of human freedom. And we may, from one of us to another, we may define that differently, but the basic impulse is to shrink the role of the state so that the area of life that is politicized is as small as possible.
Now, many people who follow politics loosely in the media, many people are used to the political spectrum being characterized from right wing to left wing. Where does Reason, where does the libertarian philosophy fit into that?
It doesn't really fall anywhere in particular on the left to right spectrum. From our perspective, people on the left have certain libertarian instincts, which they combine with certain authoritarian instincts and socialist instincts as well. And the same is true of people on the right. Basically, libertarianism goes back to classical liberalism, which was the philosophy that animated the founders and the framers. And to the extent that people are what would be called socially liberal or socially tolerant, that is classically liberal and that is libertarian. But if they don't extend that same tolerance to economic behavior, then they're not entirely consistent. And the same goes for conservatives who would want the economy to be as free as possible from government regulation, but do not extend the same tolerance to the things that people entertain themselves with, or the way, the kinds of sex they have, or the way they behave in private.
Right.
So we want freedom in the boardroom as well as the bedroom, is one way of putting it. Our slogan is free minds and free markets, which also gives you a sense of how we combine issues that appeal to people on both the left and the right.
All right. Well, thank you. I think that's a great way to put it. I've always told people, libertarians are not left wing or right wing, but we're the top of the center, so to speak. But anyway, I do encourage my audience to check out Reason Magazine. You can get it. You can subscribe to them on Twitter at Reason Mag, or you can go to www.reason.com. And if you want to learn more about Jacob, he's all over the place on Reason. He's a senior editor, like I said, so it'll be quite easy for you to find his articles, as well as two excellent books. One which I recommend, in particular to my Vape TV viewers, is For Your Own Good: The Anti-Smoking Crusade and the Tyranny of Public Health. It is a great read. So let's talk a little bit more about your work with Reason. Most of from what I can tell, you've been covering the tobacco beat, the prohibition beat. Tell me more about where your ideas come from and how you choose to write about what you do your articles on.
Well, I'm particularly interested in drug policy, which includes tobacco and alcohol, as well as illegal drugs, and the issue of being able to control what goes into your own body, being able to control your own thoughts, the content of your mind, and these are all implicated by the war on drugs, and then all kinds of other issues grow out of it relating to privacy, property rights, even things like freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of medical treatment, and so on. So I think there are a lot of important civil liberties issues that grow out of the war on drugs, for me it all comes down to the basic principle that people should be able to control their own bodies and what they put into their own bodies. The government has no business trying to dictate those choices. In addition to those issues related to drug policy, attempts by the government to tell people what to do in an what strikes me as an unjustifiable way, without giving good reasons. Would be a quick way of summarizing it. I think that in order to tell people what to do, you have to have good reasons and strong reasons, and it shouldn't be done on a whim. It shouldn't be done just because you disapprove of how they behave, or you don't like their lifestyle, or you think it is unhealthy or unwise. You have to have a strong justification, and I would argue that the government's function is to protect people's rights. So to the extent that you're not violating other people's rights, the government should leave you alone.
Well, you're preaching to the choir here. I hope this is a new way for my audience to think about this as well, if they haven't framed it from that perspective either. Because your views on electronic cigarettes, or the writing that you've done, is really no different at all from the writing that you've done on tobacco or drug policy, just because it does come back to a philosophical framework. It does come back to a foundation that can extend to any issue. The first article that I could find that you wrote about electronic cigarettes was something you wrote in March of 2009. Now that is that's very early, all things considered, in terms of major press coverage. And like I said, my audience might not be familiar with Reason before today, but it is a major publication. It has over 60,000 subscribers. It's quite popular. People read this, and Jacob is also, of course, published. He's nationally syndicated on various major newspapers. So, as of 2009, early 2009, there was very, very little out there in terms of people talking about electronic cigarettes. How did you even hear about them or find out about them that early on?
Well, what is particularly interesting to me about electronic cigarettes is that it is a good test case of the sincerity of anti-smoking activists and public health officials and other kinds of public health specialists, because ostensibly what they're all about is minimizing morbidity and mortality.
Right.
That is their game. No, that's their main aim. And what I argue in my book about the anti-smoking movement is that if that is your only goal, it's going to inevitably lead you to endorse all sorts of violations of individual freedom, because people frequently do things that increase their risk of disease or injury. Almost everything we do increases the risk of disease and injury. Just leaving the house in the morning does.
Sure.
Certainly all kinds of habits that people have, whether it involves what they eat or how much exercise they get, whether they smoke or not, and how much they drink, and all those things. How much sleep they get at night when they brush their teeth. All these things affect their health. And so if you're going to say the government is responsible for minimizing morbidity and mortality or maximizing health, then ultimately that leads you to a totalitarian system where the government dictates all of our private choices. So that's my main objection to quote-unquote public health as justification for anti-smoking measures or anti-alcohol measures or anti-obesity measures or things like seatbelt laws and helmet laws and so forth, where the government is trying to protect you from yourself, from decisions you make that might endanger you. But in the case of electronic cigarettes, and also similarly with smokeless tobacco, you have examples of alternatives to what is a substantially dangerous activity, i.e.